Good evening and welcome to the Conscious Life Expo. This is the preeminent expo featuring holistic health, spirituality, and today something extraordinary, the mystery schools, the Mayan calendar. Are we approaching a time of great change? You're about to find out. I'm talking about John Major Jenkins. Will you please give him a wonderful hand? John is the author of Maya Consciousness, Cosmogenesis, 2012, and Galactic Alignment. What he's going to be talking about today is what's currently the truth about the Mayan calendar, myths, misconceptions about the Mayan calendar, and what it really means and what it represents to us. It's incredibly powerful. This has been around for a long time. It is the very heart of the sacred mystery schools. I think you're really going to enjoy this. And without further ado, brace for impact. This is the incredible John Major Jenkins.
Thank you, Robert. Well, I'm sure almost all of you have heard of 2012. Everybody has heard of 2012. But how many of you have heard of IZAPA? IZAPA is the culture that invented the calendar that gives us 2012. And to me, this is a key to understanding what the original creators of this 2012 system or this 2012 cosmology were intending to symbolize with the 2012 end date. IZAPA was a transition culture between the older Olmec people and the emerging Maya. IZAPA is also represented by its primary site, was primarily a religious site where today we find over 60 carved monuments with significant orientations to horizon astronomy. And there's plenty of evidence and surviving carved monuments with iconography that tell us a lot about what 2012 represents. In fact, as we'll see in this slideshow, the ball court at IZAPA is what I consider to be ground zero of the 2012 prophecy. And it's my hope that as we approach 2012, we will be able to talk about 2012 in the same breath as IZAPA, and we'll understand what the connection is. I'm going to, this is mainly going to be driven by the images and the slides. I am going to have a question session at the end, so maybe reserve questions for that time. If there's something completely pressing, certainly let me know. Let's see, maybe I could sketch a little bit. I first became interested in the Maya civilization back in 1986 when I took my first trip to Mexico and Guatemala. And it was a 4-month-long odyssey, and I was visiting different villages. In the highlands of Guatemala, you find the Quiche Maya people. And they're very traditional people, and they still follow the sacred 260-day calendar. Now, the 260-day calendar is the building block of all the Mayan time cycles. And it's kind of like the key, it's almost like a multi-dimensional key that unites different levels of reality. And what I mean by that is something very, very tangible. For instance, how are we to understand the 260-day calendar, or it's called the Tzolk'in calendar, as a multidimensional key uniting different levels of human experience? Well, the Quiche daykeepers today offer, as an explanation for the 260-day calendar, the human gestation period. It's 260 days, roughly 9 months. Okay, now that operates on the realm of human biology. Okay, it's a cycle of human unfolding. Also, in the highlands of Guatemala, the interval between the planting and harvesting of corn is 260 days. That operates on the realm of agriculture. It's an earth process. And of course, in the Mayan mythology, human beings are made from corn. So there's a real deep symbolism going on there. Finally, most importantly, the 260-day calendar is used to predict astronomical cycles like eclipses and the periods of Venus and so on. So that's a celestial level. That's a celestial realm in which the 260-day calendar is an important key. So basically we have the Earth level, and we have the human level of human unfolding, and we have the larger cycles of the planets and so on. It's basically the as above, so below principle. The cycles of the Earth reflect the cycles of the sky, and the 260-day calendar is the multidimensional key to understanding these different dimensions of experience. That's just kind of a little primer on the 260-day Tzolk'in calendar. But what I'm going to be talking about is a different calendar that the Maya developed. It's called the long count calendar. And the great cycle in the long count calendar is this period of 5,125 years. And as many of you know, it ends on December 21st, 2012. And as we get into the slides, we'll see what the original creators of this system intended 2012 to represent. So I think it's important. It's my hope that you know, in order to understand the deeper esoteric meaning of the 2012 end date, we can base it upon what we find at the site of IZAPA. Okay. I'm going to have to sit down for most of this, or some of this anyway. I think I can. The classic period of the Maya civilization stretched from 200 AD to 900 AD. Around 900 AD, this pyramid in the Yucatan at the site of Chichen Itza was built. This is sort of like the one of the last phases of Mayan civilization. You know, what we really have to do in order to understand their calendars to go back even further to the 1st century BC. This is also from Chichen Itza. It's the famous observatory. And archaeoastronomers, it's kind of a new field, combines astronomy and archaeology. They're able to look at the different alignments of the walls and the windows and see exactly how it lines up with, like, for example, Venus and Mars, and like you might be able to look through. We have a blockage situation here.
Excuse this rudeness.
Okay. So we basically, you know, have these buildings that are lined up with horizon astronomy, where you'll have the moon rising or the moon setting or Venus rising or Venus setting. And so that was really a determining factor in how the Maya laid out their cities and their sites. In the upper left, I'm shown with my friend Diego. He's a Quiche Maya daykeeper. We met in '94. By that time, I'd taken many trips to Guatemala. This particular time, I was delivering relief supplies to a Quiche Maya village. These are other sites in the highlands, and this is in the Yucatan. Just, you know, from Mexico City in the west to Belize in the east, the Yucatan in the north, and down to you know, Honduras in the south, this huge Mesoamerican civilization was really doing some amazing things. And I became fascinated with the entire culture, and over the years I became fascinated with trying to solve some unresolved mysteries. And one of the biggest mysteries, of course, was why did the Maya end their calendar on December 21st of 2012? The highlands of Guatemala, as I said, was a very traditional area. And this is Lake Atitlan. And here's an active shrine site near Chichicastenango. And you have Uxmal, another site in the Yucatan, and Mitla in central Mexico, actually Zapotec, amazing Greca-style designs on the side of the building there. And visionary shamanism was very, very important to Mesoamerican civilization. Mayan culture was shamanistic, and here we have the Aztec Xochipilli, the Prince of Flowers, ecstatic gaze, awe, enraptured expression. This is actually near Palenque, and it was done just recently. I think it was put up in about 1987 or 88, and it's supposed to represent Pakal, the great King Pakal of Palenque. And even in the caves of Loltun in the Yucatan, there's another ecstatic, enraptured stone head that's very similar to Xochipilli. Visionary shamanism was very, very central. In fact, Mayan kings were like shaman. They were like king shaman, and one of their duties was to journey into the cosmic center, to retrieve the otherworldly knowledge, healing abilities, and the power of rulership. And it's a very different sort of way of approaching politics than we have in the Western world. Shamanistic cultures, they believe that the king, shaman, had to make periodic journeys into the cosmic center, visionary journeys, to sort of download the frequencies that would organize the kingdom. And they had to do that frequently in order to provide a regenerative field for their local kingdom. And what we're going to find about IZAPA when we start looking at this amazing site is that it was not only the origin place of the long count calendar, it was also the origin place of the Maya creation myth. The 60 carved monuments portray episodes from the hero twin creation myth. It's the first time they appear in the archaeological record. So this is really, really a significant site. And the other thing is that I think really contributes to understanding the amazing progressive galactic insights that were pioneered at this site of IZAPA is that they were sky watchers, and they were shaman, and they were visionary shaman, because another thing you find in the region are these religious objects called mushroom stones, which indicate there was a sacred mushroom cult going on in the area at the time that IZAPA was experiencing its heyday, around 2nd century BC, 1st century BC. So all of this notice is hundreds of years before the classic period Maya civilization began to arise. Now, I've been working with an organizer in Guatemala on tours to IZAPA, and the first IZAPA Guatemala tour was just a couple of months ago in early December, and I wanted to mention it because we're planning on having annual tours. It of course culminates at the site of IZAPA, and we go around the monument groups, and the university that dug up the monuments and reset them in the 1960s, Brigham Young University, did a really good job, and we'll see some pictures from IZAPA from the recent trip. But it's really an amazing, amazing sort of journey from Antigua, the old Spanish colonial capital, taking us up to Chichicastenango, Quiche, Cachiquel Maya town. Lake Atitlan is beautiful. There's traditional Dzutujil Maya. All of these groups are still following the sacred 260-day calendar. And Abatacalic is kind of a sister city to IZAPA. There's some amazing stuff going on there too. And we check out the hot springs, and then finally we end up at IZAPA. And sort of the clearinghouse of information on my work and upcoming events is the website alignment2012.com. And actually, some of these slides I'm going to share some insights that some of the participants in the recent tour had. I was very blessed to have one particular insightful woman who had some insights about these 3 stones at IZAPA, and I hadn't recognized that before. And this is Santa Clara Convent, Antigua, Guatemala. Beautiful, beautiful place, really. Very historic. And in my recent book, Galactic Alignment, I was taking a look at the global traditions that have something to say or in some way encode this end date alignment information that is apparently what 2012 is about. And it seems to be sort of an unrecognized layer, a galactic layer of understanding that actually we find in many traditions, including Christian iconography. You know, the cathedrals of France, there's very amazing esoteric information encoded in them, and the religious iconography of the church portals echoes that information. And Antigua has a lot of very amazing church facades. And the Virgin Mary plays a very important role. And as we'll see as we get into this information, the galactic center, the center of our Milky Way galaxy, plays a very, very important role in the 2012 end date. And if you track that information back to how the Maya think about the galactic center is like the womb of creation. You know, the Milky Way is the great goddess, the great mother goddess, and the center of the Milky Way would be the womb of creation, the place of regeneration in the sky, the place of creation in the sky. And I think that you know, this is all gets into sort of speculative thinking, but I think that it can be traced back and identified with Isis, the Egyptian mother goddess. And then at a later time in the Greco-Hellenistic period, the Virgin Mary got mapped onto the Virgin Mary. So we have these, you know, the Virgin Mary is the archetype of regeneration. There's really some amazing facades in Antigua. I devoted a whole chapter to looking at the Portada of La Concepcion, the Immaculate Conception Cathedral. It's kind of like it's interesting, you see these 3 little heads here at the bottom and the 2 priests on the left and right. Their ears are over large. It's like their hearing is expanded. They're opened up to the wisdom sense of like sitting at the feet of the great mother goddess of wisdom. And the 3 heads at the bottom, it's almost like the 3 Norns at the base of the Yggdrasil tree in Viking lore. The 3 Norns represent past, present, future. So, you know, she's transcendent to time. That's another view of the portal of La Concepcion. It's still there today. It's really amazing. There's a whole chapter in my recent book that's devoted to showing the parallels between that material and the Mayan material. The tour stopped at Lake Atitlan, and we spent a night at, this is the view from the hotel that we stayed at, and Lake Atitlan is a very amazing place. That's another view from the hotel, looking across at one of the, there's 3 volcanoes that surround the lake. Tekun Uman was a conquest-era chief of the Kaqchikel Maya, and this is a statue devoted to Tekun Uman.
What year was that rule?
It's about 1525. Chichicastenango is a lively indigenous town in the highlands of Guatemala. It's the place of a big market scene on Thursdays. And in fact, the Maya people still do rituals on the steps of the Christian cathedral, no less. So they've sort of, retaken the sacred building. Now, this picture was taken by a friend of mine who had gone to Guatemala in 1973, and I guess the difference between 1973 and 1990 is basically the color of your bird cage. Some things never change. Okay, so from Chichicastenango, the group went to Quetzaltenango and checked out the hot springs. We came down to the Pacific Coast Road. This is the Pacific Ocean down here. And there's very high volcanic peaks in this chain of mountains. Tacana volcano is the sacred mountain of the north for the IZAPANs. At the site of IZAPA, there's a main orientation to Tacana volcano. It's about 14,000 feet. And Tajumulco volcano is the highest volcanic peak in Central America. It's over 14,000 feet. And it's just, it's a land of extremes, because you go from the ocean here in a distance of some 45 miles to these incredible high peaks. And there's this narrow strip, the Soconusco area, where of course the highway is, the Pan American Highway. And that's where IZAPA is located. It's located in southern Mexico, right on the border with Guatemala. And the nearest town is, the nearest town is only about 7 miles away. It's called Tapachula. So Tapachula is actually kind of an interesting, lively, tropical Pacific town. I found it interesting that on the House of Culture on the main square in Tapachula, you have this interesting feature up there. It's actually a traditional Mayan inverted serpent column, very similar to the ones you find at Chichen Itza. So they're aware. The city of Tapachula is aware of the ruins nearby and their Mayan heritage. Right down the street from the House of Culture is the old museum. And today, there's a very important monument from the site of IZAPA that you can find in the back room of the museum. On the left is my photograph. On the right is kind of a better line drawing. And this monument, Stela 25, illustrates an episode from the Popol Vuh creation myth. It's dated to about the 1st or 2nd century BC, and we see Hunahpu, one of the hero twins, his arm is bleeding, his arm is torn off, and Seven Macaw, the vain and false ruler of the previous world age, has torn off his arm and is holding it. And you've got this feature here, the crocodile, the inverted crocodile that symbolizes the Milky Way, and Seven Macaw symbolizes the Big Dipper constellation, which is near the pole star. So this is straight scholarly interpretation, by the way. What I've done in my reconstruction is to take it a couple of levels beyond what the scholars are saying by integrating other information from different disciplines like archaeoastronomy and archaeology and calendrics and iconography, interpreting more of the symbols. Also in the museum is, well, it used to be in the museum. Now it's back at the site. It's in Group A. This is the famous Tree of Life carving from IZAPA. And Brigham Young University is the university that sponsored the dig at the site in the early 1960s, and they're associated with the Mormons, of course. So one of the Brigham Young scholars presented this theory that this represents, you've got the ocean waves at the bottom, and you've got, it was like he interpreted it as a migration scene from the Near East, because his theory was that the Izapans came from the Near East, and of course that's in the Book of Mormon and everything. I don't know myself. I think that there was a lot of unique and independent insights that were pioneered at the site of IZAPA. But it basically shows the Tree of Life. And there's the sky and the Tree of Life. And I mean, there's so much information encoded into this. It's like the creation story condensed. And again, in the town of Tapachula, right on the main square, there's a civic building that has an amazing stained glass window that faces north towards Takana volcano, where you have the Tree of Life, and there's even the Izapan sky panel, and there's the, the different things going on here. This one's in the next window nearby, and look how they got Takana volcano, which of course is off in that direction. But instead of the tree as the axis of creation, you have the woman, the mother principle. So it kind of starts to show you how different meanings are mapped onto the same symbol. The sacred mountain, the sacred tree, the sacred woman. It all has to do with the center of creation and the creation place, the source of life. Well, IZAPA is the place of origin for the 2012 calendar. And this is where I demonstrate my theory that the ancient Izapans worshipped Marlon Brando. It's a real monument. It's from Abatakalik nearby. Well, just some basic questions to answer as an orientation. What is 2012? Well, more specifically, December 21st, 2012 is the end of the 13 Baktun cycle of the Mayan long count calendar. 13 Baktuns equals 5,125 years. But when was the long count calendar invented? Well, surprisingly, this is pretty easy to answer, because we have the first monuments, the first carved stone monuments like this one from nearby IZAPA at a little site called El Baul. They're dated to the 1st century BC. Well, IZAPA was the premier site in the 1st century BC for this region. These sites near IZAPA all offer early 1st century BC long count dates carved in monuments, and they're all from this region in which IZAPA is the primary site. So it's quite reasonable to suppose that IZAPA is the origin place of the long count calendar. In fact, the famous Maya scholar Michael Coe said that IZAPA's priority in the very important adoption of the long count calendar is quite clear cut. Kind of a scholarly, cautious way of saying that they did it. Now, just a little primer on how the long count calendar works. It's sort of necessary in order to understand the tradition. This is about as mathematical as it'll get. In its simple form, there's basically 5 place value levels for the long count calendar. There's the day, there's the period of 20 days, which is called the Huinal. The period of 360 days is called the Tun. 7,200 days is a Katun, And one Baktun is 144,000 days. Now, 13 of these Baktuns make up a great cycle of 5,125 years. When I was trying to figure out what 2012 might represent, I had a suspicion that it had something to do with astronomy. And in the Maya creation myth, there are 5 world age cycles, or 5 great cycles. So if you multiply this period times 5, you get 25,625 years. And that refers to the precession cycle. Precession is a, well, how do I say this? It's caused by the slow wobbling of the Earth on its axis. And we'll get into a couple of slides that'll kind of represent that. One of the questions is, of course, well, how do you locate the long count calendar in real time? You know, how does the long count calendar correlate with our own calendar so we know what the heck we're looking at when we see these monuments? I mean, you might find a long count date on a monument that's like written 9.16.4.1.1, 9 Baktuns, 16 Katuns, 4 Tuns, 1 Huinal, and 1 day. You add up all the periods and you get this big number, and that's supposedly the number of days that has elapsed since the fabled 0 date. But again, how do you locate this all in real time? Well, scholars had looked at this question for decades, beginning with Joseph T. Goodman around 1900. And on the monuments, you might see different glyphs that say, well, here's the date, and it's an eclipse. Oh, there's a clue. Or here's the date, like this date here, for example, and it's 3 days after a new moon. Or Venus is at its easternmost elongation. Well, astronomers can look at this information and compare all the different dates and look at other sets of information like carbon-14 dating and so on. And well, after decades of interdisciplinary study, scholars by about 1930 had come up with the correlation. And it basically makes this long count date equal to May 7th of 755 AD. And therefore, the 0 date, or the first day of the long count, would have been August 12th of 3114 BC. And then since a great cycle is 5,125 years, you add forward, and you find that 13.0.0.0.0 is the end of the 13 Baktun cycle, and it correlates with December 21st, 2012.
Is that based on 365 a year or
360. It's all these periods here added up.
Where did they arrive at the 000.1? How did they get to August 3,114 BC? Who came up with that?
Well, it's because once you locate the long count in real time, you know how many days have elapsed. This is the indication of how many days has elapsed. And when you can locate that day in real time, then you just subtract that number of days and you get the first day.
Yes, but why is it that date?
Because there's 13 Baktuns in a great cycle period.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
it's a fixed number of days.
Okay.
And many of the long count monuments found record mundane historical events like king crowning rituals and so on, or a raid on a kingdom. But there are some monuments that are called creation monuments. And like this one here, this is the Baktun glyph. And in the Mayan numerical system, a bar means 5 and a dot means 1. So here you've got 2 bars and 3 dots. That's 13. 13 Baktuns, 13.0.0.0.0. It's talking about creation day.
John?
Yes?
What would have happened August 12th, 3114 BC? What would have happened then that they started counting that?
That was my question.
Oh, okay. Well, that's an interesting question. Very, very significant. I'm sorry, I didn't understand. I didn't.
I didn't know why it ends.
Yeah, I know how you derive from that, but I didn't understand what happened then to make that date.
Well, this is really interesting because it brings up the difference between the way the Maya think about time and our own presuppositions about what would be important in this. And here's